dogs are going to love this. The book is The Dogs of Camelot, Stories of the Kennedy Canines, and my guest is Margaret Reed, who wrote this book with her friend Joan Lowndes. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
I was fascinated by this, that John F. Kennedy, our former president, loved dogs, and in fact, when he was in the White House, he had, what, 9 or something?
He had 9 dogs, yes he did.
Where did this love affair start with dogs? That's number one. And number two, how did you come to write this book?
Well, first of all, I came to write the book because I actually met President Kennedy as a young girl because of his dogs.
Where did you meet him?
I met him up at Hyannisport.
Did you live there?
We were renting during the summertime, and one of his dogs got loose, came into our yard. I was about 4 years old, and my mother was screaming.
What year was this?
This was August of 1963.
Wow.
Long time ago. So she was screaming, the Secret Service came and they got the dog, and she was as Irish as they come, and she was just in an outrage. And the next day, they invited us to come over and see Charlie.
Wait. They invited you to come? Now, did you know the Kennedys? How close did you live in proximity?
Just across the street.
Oh, well, there you go.
And we really didn't know them because my family was Republican, and my mother loved Richard Nixon, and she thought he should have won the election, and President Kennedy had won the election, and she didn't really care that the president owned the dog because Nixon should have won.
All right, so you go to the compound, the Kennedy compound.
We did.
And you see a dog, puppies. What did you see there?
We saw dogs all over the place, and as a child, I loved dogs, but we couldn't have one because we lived in an apartment. And when I saw the dogs, I was in heaven. And as a young child, you don't think about being the president of the United States coming down talking to you. You're thinking about the puppies and the dogs.
Now, you're only 4 years old, so you may not remember, but did you and your mom have an ongoing conversation with President Kennedy there about dogs, or what was the...
My mother, for all she was a great talker. And when she saw the president, she didn't talk. She just lost her voice completely, and he asked us how we liked the puppies, and thanks for coming over, and he apologized for the dog coming into the yard, and then he was gone. But as a child, I knew something fabulous had happened because I just remembered how striking good looking he was. Chestnut hair, green eyes, just so nice with kids.
Part of Camelot. Right?
Absolutely.
All right, so fast forward, you obviously love animals.
I do.
And what do you do with animals?
I'm an animal behaviorist. I do training in-home clients. I started off with a PhD in economics. I worked for some of the big investment houses, and I decided this is what I wanted to do.
So that's your full-time deal?
It is. I used to work for ABC doing the soap operas, and then I started my own private business.
That could be a whole nother program. What kind of soap operas?
I did All My Children and One Life to Live and Loving. But the next book, a lot of people have to pass away before I can write that book.
Oh, I see. Yeah, so there is another book coming. All right, so when did you get the idea, let me just write this book about the dogs that the Kennedys loved so much?
I got the idea when I was at a house party for a fundraising event, and I looked at the dog, and it reminded me, it was a quick flashback to President Kennedy's dog, Clipper. And I said, I wonder what happened to that dog. So I had a close connection with the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library. I went up there to do some research just for my own benefit, and there was nothing there. So I started going back to some cabinet members that were still alive, and they said, we don't know anything about the dogs.
How did you know all these people, just from work that you were doing?
My association with the Kennedy Library, they would come up and they would do forums about the president and what his life was about, but there was nothing about the dogs. So I wanted to find out what happened to Clipper. And there was a wonderful woman who lived in Connecticut up until recently, and she was Jacqueline Kennedy's social secretary in the White House, Nancy Tuckerman. And she said, I can't help you. She said, I don't know, because it had been so many years. So I finally tracked down what had happened to the dog, and I said, I wonder what happened to the rest of them. So it wasn't started as a book. It ended up being a book.
And then you grabbed a partner, a journalist, who wrote some books.
Fabulous journalist, yes, and she was great, put me on the right road.
How did you find all the information? How did you find the pictures? How did you get access to that? And did you start talking to some of the Kennedys?
Well, John had been a friend for a while, and he had gone to the Westminster Kennel Club show with me, and I said, how did you get your love of dogs? He said, I always had them around me. I said, what happened to this dog? He goes, I don't know. I said, what happened to that dog? He goes, I don't know, but all the information should be up in my father's library.
So you're talking about John?
Yes.
So you knew him?
I did know him.
What were the conversations like as you were writing this book about the dogs?
I was more surprised that people didn't know what had happened to them because it wasn't their area of expertise. So I started going through the files. I must have gone through 100,000 documents before I started finding the information about the dogs. And truth be told, when Nancy Tuckerman passed away just recently, her files became available, and every piece of information about the dogs was in her files.
I'll be darned. Did you talk to, so fast forward, did you have a relationship with Jackie?
I knew Jackie. I had a couple times that I spoke with her. I thought she was fabulous. She had a great saying that if you produce a book, you've done something wonderful with your life. I just don't think that she thought I would be writing about her dogs when I did it.
Well, it sounds to me like you have a lot of books in your head of all the people that you've met and you've known.
I do.
And speaking of books, let's start looking at some of the pictures now that you gained access to, and you can talk about that. All right, there's Jackie with maybe one of her children, and which dog?
That's actually Clipper, the dog that came into our yard, and the child in the picture is Lee Radziwill's daughter.
Her sisters?
Her sister. Her sister was in that area at the time.
Next picture.
This is President Kennedy in the Oval Office about October of 1963. And what makes this picture so unique is the fact that he's wearing glasses. He didn't like to be photographed with glasses.
So that's a prized possession. Where are all these photographs now?
These pictures are up at the Kennedy Library. They are in the public domain.
And this was not too long before he passed.
This was about a month before.
Yeah. This is Hyannis?
This is such a great picture. It really is. I was just at Bramblетide last week. It's so ironic. They rented that house on Squaw Island, and the owners wouldn't sell it to them. Right now, his nephew, Christopher Kennedy, owns the home. And it was fun to be back there last weekend.
Beautiful place with
it really
beautiful
is.
Children, and there's 3 dogs, I think, in
And
that
what's so
picture.
sad about this picture is that Mrs. Kennedy had just come home from the Otis Air Force Base Hospital after losing her child, Patrick.
Oh my gosh.
And this dog is so great because this dog was sent to the president by the John Barry family, whose ancestor was actually the father of the U.S. Navy from Ireland when he came back. And it arrived in Washington, D.C., and he brought it up to Jackie and said to her that this was a gift for her, not to take the place of Patrick, but just to fill a void that she was missing. And ironically, this was the only dog that she kept following the president's assassination.
Did leaders around the world know of his love for animals and dogs?
They did. That's such a great question. And he had the opportunity to have more than 100 dogs, and he didn't. He didn't take them all. He took
That they
about
would
4 or
just
5.
write to him and say, hey, I want to give you a dog?
Or they would just send them through the embassies, and he would send them back. The reason he kept these, the Irish Wolfhound and the English Springer Spaniel, was because they were gifts from his home country in Ireland.
Do you suppose his love of dogs, and I suppose all of us who love dogs, is they're just so unconditional? They are there for you no matter what. If it's a Cuban Missile Crisis, if it's whatever you're up against. Was that his love of dogs? Was that the reason, do you think?
I think the reason that he liked the dog so much is because he was sickly growing up, and he always had the companionship of a dog. There was always a dog at the Kennedy family. And the first picture that I ever saw of him, he was 5 years old, holding a dog. And I think he liked them in later years because they didn't tell his secrets, and he was able to confide in them without any worries that anybody was listening.
Do you know if they took the dogs to the Summer White House to Hammersmith Farm when they were there?
They took a few of them. They didn't take
In
all
Rhode
of them.
Island.
Yeah.
So they were always around.
They
All
were
right,
always
well,
around.
let's look at some more photos of the dogs. Oh, there's John.
This is John in Hyannisport with one of the puppies from the Pushinka Charlie litter. Pushinka was a gift from Premier Khrushchev during the Cold War. And before the dog was allowed to go to the White House, it had to go to Walter Reed to be checked out for bugs, for any devices that might be on the dog. They x-rayed the dog. They checked it all out before it was able to go to the White House. And it was a very nervous dog, and it would bite a lot of people. So you don't see a lot of pictures of that dog with the children.
Interesting that they would have to debug a dog, perhaps.
Yes, that's Pushinka with the 4 puppies. Charlie was the first dog that the president had when he came to the White House. They had 1 dog, and by the time that they left, they had 9.
Oh my gosh.
And
Going
this
down
is
the slide.
Pushinka sliding down the slide. they had a kennel keeper by the name of Travis Bryant, who was an electrician, and they engaged his abilities to be the kennel keeper, so that was a part-time job that he had. And he had a lot of time on his hands, so he trained the dog to go up and down the slide, and the president was very amused by this.
Oh my goodness, there was a whole dog world there. Now there's John F. Kennedy as a child.
Yes, this picture was taken as a young boy, and back in the day, they were taking pictures with children with props, and his prop he chose was a live dog.
What kind of a dog was that?
That looks like a Norfolk Terrier.
Did they ever have mutts, or were they all pure breeds?
They all, well, they had the purebreds until the puppies came along with Pushinka and Charlie. But the president was an equal opportunity employer. And this was the East meets the West. The Cold War, so the relationships kind of warmed up. Charlie was the father and Pushinka was the mother of the puppies.
With the backdrop of the White House.
Yes.
What did you learn as you were writing this book with your partner Joan, and you were writing and writing? What do you want the viewer to take from this book, or the reader?
Well, I want the viewer to see that we had a president that normalized relationships with foreign countries, and that he had a compassion not only for people but for dogs, and he was very empathetic and he was very sincere, and the company of dogs was something that he really held in high regard. That's what I want people to see, because animals just give us so much, and we really don't give them back as much as we get.
So he wasn't a cat person, we understand, just a dog person.
He was very allergic. He had
Really?
allergy shots all the time to be near the dogs.
But he loved them anyway.
He loved them.
Now this is one photograph that I just picked out of the book, and I don't even know if we can get a close-up of this. But at any rate, it's of John F. Kennedy as a young child. Tell me about this picture.
This is a picture of President Kennedy as a young boy. Once again, he's not feeling well. He's on vacation, and his company was the dog Bobby that they had gotten as kids. And he spent all his time with this dog.
What are we going to know about JFK in this book that we didn't know before concerning his love for animals?
You're going to find out that during some of the serious crises in the world that he faced, he always had a dog with him. And if you look at the pictures in the book and you read the stories, you can center it around historic events such as the Cuban Missile Crisis, when he called for the dog to be brought into the Situation Room, where he pet the dog, almost like animal therapy, and then he gave the dog back and said, okay, it's time to make some decisions now.
When you were writing this, was there a loose end you couldn't find, that you said, well, I'm done writing, it's done, I'm going to put this to bed? But was there something else you wanted to find out that you couldn't find?
I would say no. I think
Really?
I turned over every stone, every rock, and it's amazing that since we've written this book, people that had close associations with the dog said, I read your book and I forgot about that.
Isn't that wonderful?
It's great.
Now, is this your first book?
It is my first book.
So how did you feel when it was done?
I was so ecstatic that it was done. I never wanted to read it again, but I've picked it up 6 months later, and I enjoy reading it now still.
Having written 2 books myself, the most thrilling thing for me was to have a box of books arrive, and you actually get to see this come out of a manuscript. Do you remember that day?
So exciting. So exciting.
And how long did it take you to write it?
7 years.
7 years of just toiling away.
Researching everything, every angle.
What's the next book going to be? Outside of the soap operas that you said you really can't write yet, but do you have a hankering to write another one?
I am in the process of writing one, and I'm not going to say the name of it, but it does revolve around a couple of the Kennedy administration folks.
So see your love of Kennedy, and are we going to learn new things about this?
I think you will.
Oh, see, there's the tease right there. Margaret Reed, thank you so much for coming on and enlightening us about these awesome little animals around the White House.
Thank you so much. It's great being here.
Thank you.
Spend all night kissing and the bomb was right here, then who else is missing? Got a little sidetracked and found myself wishing I found the keys to the door, but it's also a metaphor. Need to keep locked in the grocery store, but mine just to save time. Skip right ahead to the last ride.